In this video, we are going to be breaking down the saddest moments in the life of Rick and Morty. Let's get started. Rick attempts to kill himself. Rick Sanchez has always been the smartest guy in the room, but in autoerotic assimilation, we see how painful that really is. Rick, Morty, and Summer bump into Unity, a hive mind who also happens to be one of Rick's exes. Now, that alone tells you a lot. Rick doesn't date people in the traditional sense. He wants someone who can match his chaos, someone who can be everywhere at once, someone who feels like a cure for the loneliness he carries. And that's exactly what Unity is. For a man who thinks everyone else is beneath him, a hive mind that can literally be everything must feel like the perfect partner. But let's not forget where Rick is at this point in his life. His relationship with Beth is strained, he treats Jerry with open contempt, and his bond with Morty is more about convenience than family. Deep down, Rick knows he's alone. So when Unity shows up, it's about rekindling an old flame and filling a hole he doesn't want to admit is there. The reunion is messy but fun. Rick and Unity dive headfirst into reckless adventures, insane parties, and drug-fueled stunts that would kill any normal person. For a while, Rick looks genuinely happy. He's laughing, he's showing off, even letting Morty and Summer see him as something other than a miserable drunk. But here's the problem. Every time Rick indulges, Unity loses control. Her citizens slip out of the hive mind, chaos erupts, and the world she's building starts to collapse. And here's where it gets dark. Rick is toxic to himself and anyone who gets too close. Unity can hold entire civilizations together, but she can't hold herself together around him. He pushes her into self-destruction because that's what he does. He drags people down without even meaning to. And the worst part? He knows it. Summer nails it when she says Rick is bad for Unity. He knows he's poison to her. He knows he ruins the things he touches. When Rick steps out of the bathroom, he finds out that Unity gone. The city is empty. Her words plastered everywhere like a love letter and a goodbye all at once. She admits she loves him, but she can't be with him. Not because she doesn't care, but because she cares too much. With Rick, love turns into chaos, and she can't afford to lose herself again. Watching Rick read those words is brutal. Here's a man who's seen countless galaxies, who's fought gods and monsters, who has science at his fingertips, and none of it can stop him from being abandoned. He knows exactly why it's happening, and that makes it worse. Rick doesn't lose people. He pushes them away until they have no choice but to leave. What happens next is one of the bleakest moments in Rick and Morty. Rick comes home, sets up a machine, and almost kills himself. No jokes, no sarcasm, no grand exit. Just a man, a bottle, and a decision. He passes out before it happens, but the intent is there. He was ready to go. That's not comedy. That's tragedy. This episode changes how we see Rick for the rest of the series. It proves he's not untouchable. He's not just some drunk genius laughing at the universe. He's a man who wants love but can't hold on to it. He's smart enough to know the pattern and too broken to break it. Unity wasn't another fling, she was the one person who could keep up with him. And even she couldn't survive being with him. That's the real tragedy of Rick Sanchez. He loses people not because they stop caring. He loses them because his self-destruction infects everything around him. Autoerotic assimilation forces you to see Rick not as a cool, nihilistic anti-hero, but as a man drowning in his own genius and addiction. And whether you love or hate him, it's hard not to feel bad for him here. Because at the end of the day, all the portals and all the inventions in the world can't save Rick from the one thing he can't outsmart: being alone. Rick being in love with an alien might have influenced Morty, who fell in love with an alien too. Morty loses the love of his life. The show takes a kid who still wanted to believe in happy endings and shows him the brutal truth. In the Rick and Morty universe, love doesn't last. In the episode, A Rick Convenient Mort, Morty's relationship with Planetina starts like every teenager's dream. She's strong, beautiful, a literal superhero who saves the day and then looks at him like he's more than Rick's baggage. For a kid who spent his whole life being overshadowed by Rick, by Summer, even by Beth and Jerry's dysfunction, that's huge. Finally, someone sees Morty for who he is. Not a sidekick, not a pawn, not a background character. Just Morty. And she wants him. Morty has been denied love over and over throughout the series. Jessica, the girl he pines for season after season, never really gives him more than fleeting interest. The coffee girl, from the time travel episode, gone in an instant. Even when he shows his heart, he gets shut down. So when Planetina shows up, it feels different. Their relationship makes it look like he finally has a shot at happiness. He and Planetina go on dates, he gushes about her, and he's willing to go to insane lengths to protect her. When her children, the Tina Tears, try to keep her under control for profit, Morty doesn't hesitate. He slaughters them. It's shocking, brutal, and terrifying. but it shows just how far Morty is willing to go for love. He's not a kid chasing a crush anymore, he's someone willing to burn everything down for the one person who makes him feel alive. But then, the main event turns everything on its head. Without the Tina tears restraining her, Planetina spirals. At first, it's small acts of rebellion. Slashing tires, throwing a petrol bomb. Morty doesn't like it, but he tries to rationalize it because he loves her. Then comes the mining facility. 300 people die in an instant as Planetina unleashes her rage, and Morty just stands there, horrified, realizing that the girl he loves is capable of mass murder. Morty wanted to believe in a pure, honest connection, but instead, he gets a partner who mirrors the worst traits of Rick. Destructive, detached, and incapable of seeing the human cost of her actions. Morty cries as he breaks up with her, not because he stops loving her, but because he realizes love isn't enough when morality is on the line. It's devastating because this is the first time we see Morty act like an adult in a relationship, making the harder choice, the painful choice, instead of clinging to what he wants. What happens next makes things worse as Planetina shows up at his window, confessing her love, begging him to understand. Morty, through tears, says no. He can't accept what she's become, even though he still cares for her. It's the cruelest kind of breakup. Not a loss of feeling, but the realization that love itself can be toxic. When she flies off screaming and cursing, Morty collapses into Beth's arms, sobbing like the teenager he still is. And for once, Beth actually shows up for him. It's a rare moment of parental comfort in a show that usually denies him that. What makes this episode sting is that Morty isn't heartbroken, he's hardened. Every failed relationship, every time he's put himself out there, he's been slapped down. And with Planetina, it's worse, because this time he really tried. He really believed. When that ends in fire, blood, and rejection, it chips away at the part of Morty that still wants to be different from Rick. Fans have pointed out that Morty is slowly becoming Rick, and this episode is one of the clearest signs. He kills without hesitation when it comes to protecting someone he loves, just like Rick would. He experiences deep love but loses it, just like Rick has. And he learns the brutal lesson that in a universe where nothing lasts, the only constant is cynicism. The more heartbreak he endures, the closer he gets to Rick's worldview. That connection is temporary, love is fragile, and survival means shutting yourself off. And that's why this episode hurts so much. Morty deserved this win. After everything, the trauma, the adventures, the losses, he deserved to hold on to something real. And for a brief moment, he had it. But Rick and Morty gives lessons. Painful, cruel lessons. And the lesson here is that love, even when it's real, isn't always enough. Morty cries in his mom's arms, making the whole ordeal heartbreaking. This is the birth of the man who will one day be just like Rick. Lonely like Rick in this next episode. If you don't want to be left alone from fandom analysis like this, subscribe and turn on the notification for our channel. Rick Loneliness Exposed. From the outside, the old man in the seat is a silly episode. Jerry falls into yet another disastrous scheme with Glute's Love Finders app. Summer bounces from soulmate to soulmate. And Beth flails at parenting. But buried in the B-plot is one of the rawest explorations of Rick's psyche. It's about what happens when someone who has spent his life running from intimacy is suddenly confronted by the possibility of connection. For Rick, that someone is Tony. We first meet Tony when Rick discovers that someone has used his meticulously protected secret toilet. Rick's private pooping place is a temple of solitude, a rare corner of the universe where he allows himself to be vulnerable. For someone who can conquer armies and build worlds, the act of hiding a toilet says everything. It's Rick's way of admitting, without words, that even the smartest man alive needs a place to feel safe. When Tony shows up, Rick is furious. How dare someone invade the one space he made for himself? But Tony isn't intimidated. He's calm, even gentle. He explains that he too is a shy pooper, and that maybe they're not so different. Rick could kill him right there. But instead, something else happens. Tony begins to see through him. The brilliance of Tony as a character is how ordinary he is. He's not a genius. He's not a cosmic being. He's just a middle-aged man who lost his wife and is trying to get by. And yet, in his simplicity, he holds up a mirror to Rick. When Tony says pooping is about control, it's about protecting that one part of yourself the world can't take. He unintentionally cuts straight to the heart of Rick's tragedy. The toilet is about Rick desperately clinging to the illusion that he still has one thing the universe can't ruin. And in that moment, we see the real reason Rick lashes out. Tony is exposing a part of Rick he doesn't want anyone to see: his loneliness. Over the course of the episode, Rick keeps trying to reassert control. He builds elaborate traps, simulations, even fake heavens to scare Tony off. He treats him like a nuisance, like a pest. But no matter what he does, Tony keeps coming back not out of defiance, but because he sees Rick as a person, not a god. In a show where everyone either idolizes or fears Rick, Tony talks to him, offers friendship, and that terrifies Rick, because the truth is, friendship comes with vulnerability. To let Tony into his life, Rick would have to admit he wants companionship, that despite his arrogance and nihilism, he doesn't actually want to be alone. And for Rick, that's scarier than fighting alien mobs or dismantling governments. Vulnerability is his kryptonite. Then, just when it seems like Rick might soften, fate takes Tony away. He dies not through Rick's hand, but by living life recklessly after their encounters. And suddenly, Rick is left with something he almost never has to face: grief. At Tony's funeral, Rick shows up with gifts, a cloning kit, billions of credits, a half-hearted attempt at comfort. He insists Tony wasn't his friend. He curses at Tony's grieving father for even suggesting it. But the performance is transparent. Rick wouldn't be there if Tony hadn't mattered to him. His denial is his shield, but it's paper thin. For once, Rick isn't angry at the universe, he's angry at himself, for pushing away the one person who offered him honest companionship. And then comes the final gut punch. Rick returns to his toilet, alone. He sits down, and instead of peace, the toilet activates a cruel hologram he built himself. It mocks him, crowns him king shit, and reminds him that his throne is really just a monument to his loneliness. The scene is devastating, not because of the insult, but because Rick programmed it. On some level, he knew this was his fate. He designed a system to remind himself, every single time he used the toilet, that he is destined to die alone. That's the tragedy. Rick doesn't accept his loneliness, he enshrines it. He builds monuments to it. He makes sure he can never escape it, even in his most private moments. What makes this episode so heartbreaking is that Tony represented a crack in that armor. For the first time in a long time, Rick had a chance to connect with someone who didn't want him for his genius, his technology, or his chaos. Someone who simply wanted to share a toilet, to share space, to share humanity. And Rick couldn't take it. His fear of intimacy, his belief that he ruins everything he touches won out. The result is that crown of loneliness, a man worshipped by no one, but mocked by himself. The smartest man in the universe, doomed to sit on a throne of his own making, surrounded not by people who love him but by holograms of himself, reminding him that he's the saddest piece of garbage in the cosmos. In the end, The Old Man in the Seat is about what happens when someone who's built an empire of isolation is given a chance at connection and can't accept it. It's about the tragedy of Rick Sanchez, the genius who can build anything, except a life worth living. And the cruel irony is that the only person who saw through him, who dared to reach out a hand of friendship, is gone forever, leaving Rick to sit alone on his toilet throne, king shit of a kingdom made of nothing but loneliness. In this next episode, Morty just wants a little control over his life. But instead, he gets weighed down by the universe, by Rick, and even by the choices he makes himself. Morty Vat of Acid episode. From the very start, the episode sets Morty up to fail. He's frustrated with Rick's ridiculous plans, tired of always playing second fiddle, and openly critical of how Rick never respects his ideas. The Vat of Acid plan looks stupid to him, and honestly, it is, but it's also Rick's way of flexing control. For Morty, another reminder that his voice doesn't matter. He's stuck in Rick's shadow, watching a man who never lets him grow, and he's desperate for something different. That's why Morty latches onto the idea of the time-saving device, the fantasy of having his own agency, of being able to take charge of his life without Rick dictating the rules. The argument between Rick and Morty after the acid incident makes this crystal clear. Morty is angry. He wants to matter. He wants Rick to finally acknowledge that his ideas aren't all dumb. When Rick finally caves and builds the device, it feels like Morty has won. But what he really gets is freedom. It's a slow-motion tragedy disguised as a victory. At first, the device works perfectly. Morty uses it for mischief, then for confidence, then for romance. His relationship with the girl outside the coffee shop is one of the most human, tender arcs we've ever seen for Morty. A real connection built step by step, mistake by mistake, repair by repair. We watch him grow, not as Rick's sidekick, but as his own person in love. The montage is almost cruel because it lets us imagine Morty finally finding something stable, something Rick's universe never gives him. Happiness that lasts. But tragedy lives in the small details. Their plane crash, the mountain ordeal, the moments of survival and near death, they all show that Morty is willing to fight for this love. For once, he doesn't use the device as an escape hatch. He chooses to stick with her, to endure hardship, to take life as it is. That choice feels monumental, like Morty has finally risen above Rick's cynicism. And just when the story gives him that triumph, Jerry ruins it all with a single push of a button. The remote resets his life, erasing the relationship, erasing all the growth, and leaving Morty humiliated and empty. Morty learns that even when he chooses love over shortcuts, the universe can still erase everything. Nothing is permanent. His pain is invisible, like it never happened. But to him, it's as real as it gets. That's the curse of the device everyone else moves on. But Morty has to live with memories nobody else shares. Morty, lost and broken, throws himself into pointless cycles of death with the gorillas, as if testing whether existence has any meaning left. His search for joy has turned into proof that joy is fragile, fleeting, and disposable. And when he goes back to Rick, you can see the desperation in his actions. He doesn't even care about the device anymore. He wants to stop hurting. That's when Rick delivers the cruelest revelation. The device was never about restarts or harmless saves. Every time Morty pressed it, he didn't undo a mistake, he jumped into another version of himself, leaving behind countless Mortys to die in brutal ways. The happy love story wasn't even clean. It was bought at the price of hundreds of other versions of himself who suffered, who drowned. Morty's growth wasn't his alone. It was stolen, pieced together from a graveyard of discarded selves. The real horror of the episode. Morty thought he was finding love, but what he was really doing was building a tower of corpses. Every kiss, every laugh, every moment of hope came attached to invisible suffering. And Rick makes sure Morty sees it, replaying the evidence, rubbing it in, forcing him to carry that guilt forever. Morty can never look at his own choices the same way again. He has tasted real love, real loss, and real guilt, all in a loop he cannot explain to anyone else. No one will ever understand the pain he carries. Not his family, not even Rick, who engineered the whole ordeal to win an argument. In the end, Morty caves. He jumps back into the vat of acid, broken, humiliated, and silenced. The crowd disperses, the world moves on, but Morty knows the truth. His life isn't his own. His victories aren't his victories. His tragedies don't matter to anyone else. Even his girlfriend, who almost became his salvation, sees him vanish into acid and leaves in tears. It's the ultimate image of Morty's existence. Love slipping away while he hides in someone else's plan. And what does Rick get out of it? A smug lesson. He tells Morty to never make fun of him again, reducing an entire saga of heartbreak into a petty point-scoring exercise. For Rick, this was about ego. For Morty, it was about his soul. The imbalance is staggering, and it underlines why Morty's tragedy is so powerful. Morty comes out of this episode changed. He has been exposed to the cruelty of existence in a way that accelerates his descent into distrust. Each heartbreak, each betrayal, each erased moment pushes him closer to Rick's worldview. He is learning the same lessons that made Rick who he is, that love is fleeting, that agency is an illusion, that life is just a cruel joke. And while Morty still clings to shreds of hope, episodes like this show that piece by piece, the universe is breaking him down. The Vat of Acid episode is the story of a boy who wanted control, found love, lost it, and discovered that even his happiest memories are tainted by suffering. It's the tragedy of Morty, realizing that in Rick's universe, nothing good comes without an unbearable cost. Rick's tragedy in this next episode is that he finally has to face the truth that he's not only a bad father, but he's an absent one who has been hiding behind science and avoidance for years. Speaking of absence, you don't want our content missing from your FYP. Please subscribe to support our channel. Rick's bad parenting. The story begins with Beth, or rather a version of Beth, leading a rebellion against the Galactic Federation. She's strong, fearless, and merciless, even killing a soldier who couldn't remember her name. Space Beth, the warrior daughter Rick helped create. At the same time, the Beth on Earth is living a normal life, trying to hold her family together, and here the central conflict starts to emerge. Which Beth is real? Which one is the clone? And more importantly, what does Rick's choice say about him as a father? The episode shows how Rick has essentially split his daughter in two. One version is the adventurer he always wanted, someone who mirrors his dangerous lifestyle. The other is the homemaker, the Beth who stayed, married Jerry again, and tried to live a stable life. Both Beths are products of Rick's indecision. When Beth asked him to choose for her, should she stay on Earth or go live a bigger life? Instead of answering, he built a clone and randomized their identities so that even he didn't know which was the original. In other words, Rick chose not to choose. When the two Beths finally confront Rick in the garage, the tension spills out. Both Beths want to know who the clone is. Both want validation. And Rick gives them neither. His deflections, his excuses, and his half-truths only deepen the wound. To Space Beth, he admits that maybe the clone is the one on Earth. To Earth Beth, he suggests the opposite. It's his cowardice on full display. The one weakness Rick never truly admits. He can't handle the weight of being needed by the people he loves. The main event comes when the family is dragged into the conflict with the Galactic Federation. Tammy, Phoenix Person, and the NX-5 planet remover all play their part, but the real battle, Rick versus himself. He's forced to save two versions of his daughter without acknowledging either of them as real. He tries to sacrifice himself, thinking the Federation still views him as a major target, only to discover they don't care anymore. For someone like Rick, who builds his entire identity around being the smartest man in the universe, this is devastating. He's not even important enough to kill. As Rick fights Phoenix Person, it becomes painfully clear how alone he really is. His best friend has been turned against him. His daughter doesn't know if she's real, his family sees him as a liar, and all his genius can't fix any of it. He gets beaten down physically, his cybernetic guts spilling out as he struggles to keep up. And emotionally, as he realizes that his relationships have rotted from years of neglect. Even Jerry, the family's punching bag, manages to distract Phoenix Person long enough to save him, showing that Rick isn't the indispensable figure he thinks he is. Rick brings his family home, battered but alive, only for the two Beths to outright reject him. He tries to reveal the truth by showing which Beth is the clone, but the reality is worse than either outcome. He erased his own memory of the decision. He literally ran from fatherhood so completely that he can't even give his daughters the closure they're begging for. To them, this confirms everything they feared, that Rick doesn't love them enough to take responsibility. They walk away, leaving him to sit in silence, rejected by both versions of his daughter, and no longer admired by anyone in his family. Rick wanted to believe that by cloning Beth, he gave her freedom. In reality, he robbed her of identity. Both Beths are left with existential crises. If they're the clone, does that make their lives less meaningful? If they're the real one, does that mean the other version is disposable? Rick forced them into this torment so he wouldn't have to confront his own feelings as a father. His selfishness didn't damage his family, it split them in half. Even worse, the Federation doesn't fear him anymore. The man who once toppled galactic governments with his intelligence is now seen as irrelevant, a has-been who hides in his garage. Bird Person, his one true friend, is gone, replaced by a hostile machine he has to disable like any other enemy. When Rick finally turns Phoenix Person off and sits alone with the scraps of what used to be his friend, it's one of the most haunting images of the series. A man surrounded by the consequences of his own brilliance alone, unloved, and unneeded. What makes this episode so tragic is how preventable it all was. Rick didn't need to create two Beths. He didn't need to hide behind science, excuses, or arrogance. All he had to do was be honest. His daughter came to him vulnerable, asking for his guidance, and instead of being a father, he chose to be a scientist. In the end, it didn't make him look smarter. It made him look small. The irony is that everyone else grows in this episode. Morty and Summer finally work together, setting aside their childish rivalry to play a meaningful role in the battle. Even Jerry, in his own ridiculous way, manages to matter. The family proves that they don't need Rick as much as he wants to believe. His refusal to step up as a father has made him less central to them, not more. That's why the ending hits so hard. The family, even with two Beths, carries on. They laugh about having two moms, Jerry jokes about having two wives, and the kids don't care which Beth is the real one. To them, it doesn't matter. But to Rick, it matters deeply. Watching him sit there, forcing himself to see the memory of what he did, it's clear that he knows the truth. He failed. Not as a scientist, not as an adventurer, but as a father. The tragedy of Rick in this episode is that he's finally stripped of his excuses. His genius can't shield him from the truth anymore. He's a man who broke his daughter in two to avoid answering a simple question. What do you want from me, Dad? And now, with both Beths walking away, Rick is left with the answer he never wanted: nothing. Just as Rick discovered that nothing matters, Morty's tragedy in this next episode is simple. He discovers that caring too much in a universe built on exploitation will only bring him pain. Morty faces cannibalism. Things begin with something that feels almost wholesome. Every Thursday, the Smith family gathers around the table for spaghetti bolognese. It's one of the few stable rituals they share, a pocket of normalcy in their otherwise chaotic lives. Rick provides it. And for once, it seems like he's giving them a gift instead of dragging them into danger. But Morty soon learns the truth. The pasta comes from people. On a distant world, the bodies of those who commit suicide literally turn into spaghetti, and Rick has been sourcing their family dinners from this gross process. For Rick, it's a practical detail. Food is food. For Morty, it's a moral crisis. He can't eat without imagining the people who died to create the meal. The horror becomes personal at Lawrence's funeral, one of the men they had unknowingly consumed. Morty blurts out the truth. admitting to the mourners that he and his family had eaten the deceased. It's one of those rare Morty moments where guilt overwhelms fear. He knows he'll be judged, but he can't keep quiet. The reaction he gets at home makes the moment even sadder. Instead of outrage, or even compassion, his family feels inconvenienced. They're upset that their tradition of spaghetti night is over. The fact that they've been eating human beings barely registers. Morty stands there, desperate for someone to share his guilt, but the people closest to him treat it like a minor disappointment. He's left isolated in his own home, the only one crushed by conscience. When the president of Spaghetti Planet reaches out to him, Morty sees hope. The president proposes a new approach: ethically sourced spaghetti, made from those who willingly chose assisted suicide and consented to becoming food. Morty latches onto the idea. If the person wanted it, then maybe eating the meal doesn't feel so shameful. For the first time since his discovery, Morty feels like he's found balance. He convinces his family to return to Thursday spaghetti nights, this time with a clean conscience. But the relief doesn't last. Rick reveals that the planet has industrialized the entire practice. What began as a small system of consent has become a galaxy-spanning industry. The brand, Morty-O's Suicide Spaghetti, now appears on shelves everywhere, marketed as an ethical choice thanks to Morty's endorsement. Behind the slogan, the government has been encouraging depression among its population to keep the supply chain running. Morty's attempt to solve the problem has only given cover to a darker exploitation. His morality has been twisted into advertising. Morty wanted to fix things, but he accidentally made them worse. He tries to challenge the president, but the answer is economics. The planet cannot survive without the trade. Without spaghetti, their economy collapses. The choice Morty is given is impossible. Support, exploitation, or watch millions starve. Desperate, Morty does something that shows how much the situation has broken him. He goes to Rick for help and promises to do whatever Rick wants for 2 weeks in return. The same Morty who always resists his grandfather's pessimism, the Morty who constantly argues for compassion. Yet here he is, bargaining away his values. To make the guilt stop, Rick's solutions are clinical and cruel. He creates artificial lifeforms meant only to kill themselves, hoping this will satisfy both ethics and appetite. But even these creatures resist. The more aware they are, the more they try to survive. The less aware they are, the worse the product tastes. The final creation is horrifying. A torso with a single arm, able only to end its own life. Morty is forced to confront the sight of beings engineered for the sole purpose of dying, and the weight of his choices becomes unbearable. Even this nightmare doesn't work. Consumers demand the original flavor. Activists rise against the new methods, shouting about torso rights. Protests erupt, factories are destroyed, and the planet spirals into chaos. Morty watches the system collapse around him, all because no one cares about the ethics as much as he does. To the rest of the galaxy, spaghetti is spaghetti. The final chapter of his tragedy comes with Fred Bunks, a terminally ill billionaire who opposed the industry. With only months left to live, Fred becomes the last hope for production. Rick convinces him to sacrifice himself in order to end the trade once and for all. Fred agrees, not because he believes in the system, but because he hopes his death will shut it down forever. As Fred undergoes assisted suicide, his memories are broadcast across the planet. Everyone sees his life, his childhood joys, his losses, his moments of greed, his flashes of kindness. For the first time, Morty and the galaxy are confronted with the reality that every plate of spaghetti represents a full human story, complicated and messy. The appetite dies instantly. When Rick cooks Fred's remains and serves them to Morty, the boy can't eat. He's haunted by the weight of Fred's humanity. And in that refusal, Morty's journey comes full circle. He started by feeling guilt for one man, and ends by being unable to detach from the humanity of them all. He has learned what Rick has always avoided, that empathy makes survival unbearable. Rick, ever the unconcerned, tells Morty that consumption defines life. Beings eat, exploit, and use each other, asking if it's right or wrong is meaningless. But even Rick hesitates after tasting Fred's spaghetti. The sincerity of Fred's life kills his appetite too. It's one of the rare moments where Morty's way of seeing the world bleeds into Rick's armor. But that doesn't comfort Morty. For him, it's confirmation that caring always ends in despair. The Smith family moves on, replacing spaghetti with Salisbury steak. They choose ignorance, joking about the source, but not really wanting to know. The meat is delicious, and that's enough for them. Morty doesn't get that luxury. He's the only one still carrying the weight of what they've done. Morty's compassion doesn't save anyone. It doesn't reform the system. It doesn't change his family. It only leaves him lonelier, more burdened, more aware of the cruelty that others ignore. The spaghetti is gone, but the weight of knowing remains, and Morty has no way to put it down. Rick has always been the smartest man in the room. But this episode, the ABCs of Beth, peels back the layers and reveals that he doesn't really know his own daughter. Please like this video and subscribe to get weekly updates of your personal episodes. Rick realizes that his daughter hates him. It begins with a news report about Joseph Lipnip, a man about to be executed for killing and eating his own son. The story is grotesque enough, but for Beth, it stirs up an old memory. She remembers her childhood fantasy world, a place she called Fruppyland. She laughs at how silly she used to be. But Rick doesn't laugh. He tells her the shocking truth. Fruppyland wasn't imaginary. He had built it for her. A pocket dimension, colorful and safe, a place to keep her busy when he didn't want to deal with her. Beth is shaken. If Fruppyland was real, then Tommy, the boy who disappeared when they were children, might still be trapped there. Beth insists on going inside to see. Rick comes along, but already the tension between them is raw. She accuses him of shoving her into a glorified chicken coop instead of being a real father. Rick shrugs it off, but his silence says everything. Inside Fruppyland, the colors are bright and childlike, yet something unsettling lurks beneath the surface. Rick is quickly captured by a giant bird creature and nearly eaten alive. He loses an arm in the fight but replaces it with a mechanical one, almost casually. For Beth, though, the horror is beginning. They discover that life in Fruppyland has been twisted. The creatures carry human DNA. Tommy is still here, but the world has changed around him. Beth and Rick put the pieces together. Tommy must have survived by doing unthinkable things. He bred with the Fruppyland creatures, creating generations of hybrid children. He ate some to live. He ruled the rest like a god. Rick delivers the conclusion with cold logic, but Beth is horrified. When they're captured, her worst fear is confirmed. Tommy is alive, surrounded by his weird family. He stages a play that mocks Beth, showing how she trapped him out of jealousy all those years ago. It's his twisted revenge. Rick watches this unfold, and for once, he looks less like a genius and more like a man who has failed everyone. He made Fruppyland to protect Beth, but also to avoid her, and now, standing in front of the monster Tommy has become, he's forced to see the outcome of his neglect. Beth is torn. She wants to make things right. She tries to convince Tommy to leave with them, but he refuses. He doesn't want to forgive her. He doesn't want to change. When his children attack, Beth snaps. She kills them all in a frenzy of survival, maybe even killing Tommy himself. She comes back with only his finger. Rick, almost casually, suggests cloning Tommy so his father on Earth won't watch his execution. He treats it like a problem solved. But Beth feels something heavier. That weight deepens when she and Rick finally talk. Rick admits why he built Fruppyland. Because Beth was a scary kid. She asked him to make cruel toys, violent games, dangerous gadgets. She had the same darkness in her that he carried. And instead of facing that, instead of guiding her, he pushed her into another world. It was easier to keep her locked away than deal with the fact that his daughter was becoming like him. Beth tries to shift the blame back. She says she only asked for those things because she wanted his attention. She wanted him to spend time with her. Every dangerous request was really a plea for love. Rick doesn't answer that. For once, his mouth is quiet. Maybe because deep down he knows she's right. By the end, Beth is given a choice. She can stay with her family, living a normal, if broken, life. Or she can leave and travel the stars, while Rick replaces her with a clone so her family won't know she's gone. The decision is left unsaid, a question hanging in the air. But the tragedy doesn't lie in what she chooses. The tragedy is Rick himself. For years, he told himself he was protecting Beth by giving her Fruppyland. But the truth is simpler and sadder. He didn't want to deal with her. She was too much like him, and he couldn't bear to look in that mirror. Instead of helping her grow, he shoved her away. And now, as an adult, Beth is left with the scars of that childhood. She carries his same cruelty, his same hunger for control, his same darkness. Rick wanted to believe he was different, smarter, above it all. But this episode strips him down to a father who failed his daughter, who saw the worst in her because it was the same worst inside himself. And no amount of science, no dimension hopping, no clever inventions can erase that. Jerry makes Rick look worse in this moment. Jerry, weak and silly as he is, tries to date an alien named Kira. It falls apart in predictable fashion, but at least Jerry tries. At least Jerry shows his kids some kind of honesty, however clumsy. Rick, for all his genius, can't even do that. The final scene in this episode is heartbreaking. Rick alone, knowing his daughter is like him, knowing that he built her prison, and in doing so, built the very monster she fears she's become. He hides it under sarcasm, under his usual swagger. But the truth lingers. Rick is afraid of losing Beth. He's afraid of seeing himself in her. And for once, the smartest man in the universe looks powerless. When Rick and Morty walk into the carnival of nightmares, the monsters and the screams don't even scare them anymore. For Morty, this shows how used to danger he's gotten, like it doesn't even bother him now. Morty faces his greatest fear. Traveling with Rick has pushed him so far that even nightmares feel ordinary. But when the man in the suit offers them a fear hole, Morty sees something Rick doesn't. Rick shrugs it off. Morty, however, jumps in. And that single choice begins the darkest journey of his young life. Inside the fear hole, Morty is thrown into pure terror. Strange creatures surround him, tearing into his body, stuffing him with maggots, trying to take him apart like he's nothing. For Morty, this is pain, the feeling of being powerless, of being treated as replaceable. He screams, he struggles, and for once Rick has to dive in to pull him out. On the surface, it looks like victory. But underneath, Morty is shaken. That moment is the fear hole whispering to him, "You don't matter, not even to the people closest to you." The torment only grows when a young Rick appears, holding Diane, Rick's wife. Morty sees a version of Rick's dream come true. A family whole again. Happy again. And in that moment, Morty feels something cut deep, the thought that he could be pushed aside if Rick ever had the chance to rebuild what he lost. Morty realizes his fear is of being abandoned by the one person he keeps risking his life for. As the episode unfolds, Morty watches Rick try again and again to hold on to Diane. He watches Rick flirt with her, laugh with her, even kiss her in the rain. And with each moment, Morty feels himself slipping further into the background. He's not the center of Rick's world here. He's not even close. And for Morty, who has built so much of his fragile self-worth around Rick needing him, this is torture. His grandpa's happiness means his own disappearance. The fear hole uses this to break him down. Morty starts to see what happens if Rick stays. Rick's health fades, his body weakens, and yet Rick doesn't care. Rick is ready to die in the arms of a woman who isn't even real, and Morty can only watch. The fear shifts from abandonment to something worse. The fear of watching Rick destroy himself while Morty is powerless to stop it. It's the nightmare of every child who loves someone too broken to be saved. Morty tries to fight back. He begs the man in the suit to release him, but he is told that Rick is the perfect victim, someone who would rather die than face his own truth. And in that refusal, Morty's despair grows heavier. He realizes that no one is coming to save him. Not even Rick. If he wants to survive, he has to face what the fear hole says is his deepest fear. Not being accepted, not being normal, being laughed at, being alone. So Morty throws himself into humiliation to prove he can take it. And little by little, the world around him shakes. But this is triumph. It's pain. Every stumble, every humiliation reminds him of how fragile he feels inside. It's the raw picture of a boy who doesn't believe he's enough. Then comes the cruelest revelation. After all the terror, after all the breakdown, Morty finally learns what his real fear is. Not monsters, not failure, not even Rick's death. It's the idea that in Rick's eyes, he is replaceable. Fungible. Another Morty in a long line of Mortys. And the most heartbreaking part is that the Rick who tells him this isn't even real. It's the fear hole itself using Rick's face, Rick's voice, to make Morty admit what he's always been afraid of. That Rick doesn't truly need him. When Morty finally escapes, he isn't triumphant. He isn't proud. He's broken. He climbs out of the hole and sees Rick, the real one, waiting outside like nothing happened. Rick never even jumped in. Morty pours out the horror of what he went through, begging for one clear answer: is he important? Is he irreplaceable? And Rick gives him enough to keep him standing, but not enough to heal the wound. Morty refuses a hug, not because he's strong, but because he can't bear the thought of reaching out and being left hanging. The episode ends with Morty surviving, yes, but at a cost. His fear is no longer hidden. It has been ripped open, raw and bleeding. The fear that the person he loves most might not see him as special. That he is another Morty in an endless sea of Mortys. For Morty, this is worse than death, because death would be over. But living with the question, do I really matter to Rick, is a wound that will never fully close. Weddings are supposed to be moments of joy. Families gather, friends reconnect, and love takes the stage. But for Rick Sanchez, Bird Person's wedding becomes the stage where his world finally collapses. If you want to be part of the channel growth, like this video and subscribe for more videos like this. Rick loses everything. He begins the episode scoffing at the very idea of attending calling weddings, funerals with cake. On the surface, it's a joke. But beneath it, we see the truth. Rick has no faith in love, no faith in permanence, no faith that happiness ever lasts. It's easier to sneer than to admit he's afraid. And yet, despite his protests, Rick is dragged along not out of excitement, not out of hope, but because he has no choice. From the start, Rick's distance is clear. As Beth mingles, Jerry embarrasses himself, and Morty begs him to open up. Rick stands apart. He has been to war with Bird Person, fought alongside him in rebellions, but even here, he can't let himself show care. Morty urges him to give a toast, to say something real. And for once, Rick tries. He speaks about love. He tries to be honest. For a moment, he opens his chest enough for everyone to see there's a heart beating inside. It is one of Rick's rare vulnerable moments. But it's a mistake, because the second Rick lets his guard down, everything is ripped away. Tammy reveals herself as a Federation agent. Bird Person is gunned down before Rick's eyes, and the wedding turns into a massacre. Rick watches helplessly as the man who once believed in him is riddled with bullets. The one person who understood the war they fought together dies because Rick dared to step into his life. It's the universe's cruel reminder to Rick: care for nothing, or you will lose everything. From that moment on, Rick is a ghost. Squanchy sacrifices himself to save the family, but Rick can barely register it. He isn't fighting to win anymore, he's only fighting to keep the Smiths alive long enough to run. Every shot, every scream, every death at that wedding only reinforces the story Rick already tells himself. Everyone close to him gets destroyed. On the run, Rick becomes more desperate. He leads his family across planets, searching for somewhere to hide. Each world becomes a cruel joke, one too small, one covered in endless corn, one with a sun that never stops screaming. No matter where they go, there's no peace, no place to settle. And as the Federation occupies Earth, Rick's fear grows into inevitability. He knows his life is on the line anymore. It's theirs. In one of the most heartbreaking moments of the series, Rick overhears his family debating his worth. Jerry, bitter and small, argues that Rick should be turned in. But Beth, Morty, and Summer defend him. They defend the man who has insulted them, abandoned them, dragged them into chaos. Beth breaks down, confessing her fear of being abandoned by him again. Morty insists they must stand by Rick, even if Rick wouldn't do the same. Summer argues that love is about loyalty, even when it hurts. And Rick listens. The knife that cuts deepest. His whole life, he has convinced himself that his family doesn't need him, that they would be better off without him, that attachment is weakness. But in that cave, he hears the opposite. They love him. They are willing to give up their lives, their earth, their future, to stay by his side. They are choosing him. And suddenly, all Rick can feel is guilt, because deep down, he knows Jerry was right. Rick is selfish. He is destructive. He has dragged his family into battles they never asked for, into wars they cannot survive. He has killed and lied and broken, and the people paying for it are the ones who love him most. And for the first time in the series, Rick does something unthinkable. He puts someone else first. He doesn't say goodbye directly. He doesn't confess his plan. He tells Morty they're going out for ice cream, his voice soft, almost kind. Then he walks away. He tips off the Federation himself, disguising his voice as Jerry's, and he surrenders. He asks for his family to be spared. For once, Rick takes the bullet. The Federation takes him in chains. The genius who once mocked the galaxy's systems is locked in a cell. Another prisoner asks him what he did. And Rick, eyes dead, simply says, "Everything." In that one word, he confesses the truth he has been running from his whole life. He blames himself for all of it. Bird Person's death, Squanchy's sacrifice, Earth's invasion, his family's suffering. Rick's tragedy is that he believes the world is better without him. This episode tears down the mask of the untouchable scientist. We see Rick's humor, his bravado, his arrogance stripped away. At Bird Person's wedding, he is reminded that love can be taken from him in a second. In hiding, he is reminded that family still wants him despite everything. And in surrender, he finally admits the cost of his life. The Federation doesn't break Rick. His family's love does. Because for a man who has spent decades insisting he doesn't care, realizing that people care for him truly, selflessly, is unbearable. When he sits in that prison cell, we don't see Rick the conqueror, or Rick the genius. We see Rick the broken man. A man who has lost his best friend, who has betrayed his family by existing in their lives, and who has finally given up. His everything is not pride in his sins. It is despair. It is the weight of every mistake crushing him all at once. The tragedy is that Rick does the right thing, and it destroys him. He saves his family by giving himself up. He keeps them safe by locking himself in chains. And no one is there to hold him when it's done. The family goes home, uneasy, under Federation control. Jerry smiles, finally given a function. But Rick sits alone, in a cell. stripped of his freedom, stripped of his defenses, with nothing but his guilt to keep him company. Weddings are funerals with cake, Rick said at the start. For Bird Person, it became true. For Rick, it was worse. Because at this wedding, Rick lost his best friend and the last fragments of his illusion that he could ever belong, ever be loved, ever keep his family safe. Rick loses everything. And he believes it's exactly what he deserves. Morty is faced with reality after trying to erase his memory, so he must see through the memories that he suppressed. Morty sad erased memories. From the beginning of Morty's Mind Blowers, the focus is on Morty's vulnerability. He's not the loud, arrogant one. He's not the scientist who can warp reality to his will. He's a teenager, still growing, still learning, still scared. The episode starts in chaos, Rick and Morty sprinting through an M.C. Escher nightmare world, chased by an alien creature, Morty clutching a strange turtle. This turtle, the truth tortoise, is no ordinary animal. It forces anyone who looks at it to see truths they can't bear. Morty can't resist. He glances. And in that one mistake, he proves what this episode is about. Morty cannot live under the full weight of knowledge. The place collapses around them. Rick saves them again, but the damage is already done. Morty is rattled. His head is spinning with memories he can't shake. He isn't annoyed. He's haunted. He begs Rick to take it away, to erase what he saw. And with that plea, the doors open to something darker, the chamber of Morty's Mind Blowers. Here, we discover that this is the first time Morty has begged Rick to erase something. It's a whole archive tubes filled with moments so painful, so humiliating, so soul-crushing that Morty couldn't carry them anymore. Rick calls them Morty's Mind Blowers. Rows and rows of colored tubes, like trophies of Morty's pain. It's a catalog of trauma, hidden under the garage, out of sight but never gone. The first memory Rick shows us sets the tone. Morty remembers accusing Mr. Lunas, his school guidance counselor, of being an alien who lived on the moon. Morty was right, sort of. But through a cruel twist of misinterpretation, Principal Vagina thinks Morty is accusing the man of something sinister, confronts him, and the whole situation spirals until Mr. Lunas kills himself. Morty, horrified, realizes it was a smudge on his telescope lens. A man died because Morty trusted his instincts. The guilt is unbearable. He can't live with it. So, Rick takes it away. That's one memory. And the more Morty digs, the more we see the pattern. He is clumsy or naive. He's forced into situations where every choice ends in blood, shame, or loss. Memories of Beth choosing Summer over him. Memories of Rick tricking him, using him, belittling him. Memories of animals dying, of Morty's body being mutilated, of him being eaten, hunted, humiliated. Morty's life is a carousel of trauma, and the only way he can function is by carving pieces of himself out and handing them to Rick. What makes it worse is the discovery that not all the memories were Morty's choice. Rick has erased things on his own times when he himself looked weak, embarrassed, or wrong. Morty is a victim of circumstance. He's a victim of Rick's pride. His very mind is a battlefield where Rick's ego and Morty's pain collide. Morty's rage in this moment is about the memories. It's about betrayal. He realizes his grandpa has been cutting into his very identity, reshaping him without permission, to protect himself. Morty attacks Rick. The fight is brutal, desperate. Two people who love each other in the most twisted way possible, locked in a struggle over control of Morty's mind. Rick erases Morty's memory mid-fight, but Morty turns the device back on Rick. Suddenly, neither of them remember who they are. This sequence is where Morty's tragedy deepens. Stripped of context, Morty doesn't see himself as a hero. He doesn't see himself as loved. He sees himself through the fragments of memory, a boy constantly suffering, constantly humiliated, constantly powerless. He replays trauma after trauma, each memory pounding into him like a hammer. The smudge on the telescope, the squirrels plotting world domination, Rick chopping him into pieces, over and over. Morty watches himself fail, scream, or break. Without the erasures, without Rick's selective editing, Morty sees the full, unfiltered truth of his life. And it's unbearable. For Morty, the realization is simple. His life is suffering. Every adventure, every so-called bonding moment, is another scar. And if that's all he is, if his story is nothing but humiliation and pain, then what's the point of continuing? For the first time in the series, Morty chooses death. He holds a gun to his head, and in a dark, twisted reflection of loyalty, Rick joins him. The two stand side by side, ready to pull the trigger. Morty is scared of himself, scared of what his life means, scared that he's nothing more than a disposable sidekick to a grandfather who can't even let him keep his own memories. His tragedy is the pain itself. It's the idea that this pain defines him, that he is nothing but a collection of failures, edited and rearranged by Rick. And then Summer walks in. It's almost funny, the way she finds them with guns to their heads. Rick blankly not recognizing her. But instead of being horrified, she's resigned. She knows this has happened before. She explains that Rick has a contingency plan for moments like this. She tranquilizes them, restores their memories, and drags them to the living room. For her, it's routine. For Morty, it's another humiliation, he and Rick screaming at her, blaming her, as if she's the problem. When Rick and Morty wake up, they think they've missed an episode of Interdimensional Cable. They hurl insults at Summer and march off for their next adventure. But the audience knows better. Morty is trapped. His pain has been erased, restored, erased again. His trauma is gone. It's buried, waiting to resurface. This episode is a window into Morty's mind, and what we see is bleak. Morty is a child drowning in experiences too heavy for him to carry. Every adventure with Rick leaves a mark, and when the marks become too many, Rick scrapes them away. But scars don't vanish. They pile up. And Morty, deep down, knows it. The tragedy of Morty in this episode is that he begs for ignorance. He can't live with the truth. The truth tortoise at the beginning was symbolic Morty looking at something that shows him reality, and reality being too much. By the end, we realize that his whole life is like that turtle. Every memory, every scar is truth, and Morty can't bear it. So Rick takes it away, over and over, until Morty isn't even sure who he is anymore. Morty's Mind Blowers reveals that Morty's greatest fear is death, or monsters, or aliens. His greatest fear is that his suffering means nothing, that he is a vessel for pain, disposable, forgettable, replaceable. And the worst part is that the people who love him, Rick most of all, are the ones who reinforce that fear. At the end of the episode, Morty is alive, his memories restored, his trauma hidden once again. He goes on another adventure, yelling at his sister, pretending everything is normal, but the audience knows the truth. Morty is broken. He is surviving not because he's strong, but because his own mind is constantly being rewritten. He isn't allowed to carry his pain, so he never gets to grow from it. He's trapped in a cycle of trauma and erasure, and the only escape he can imagine is death. Though Rick could be hurtful toward Morty at times, acting like he does not care, there are times when this masks slip of, like in the next episode, and there he expresses length he would go through to save Morty. The length that is taken to produce analysis like this is huge, so please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more video like this. Rick sacrifices himself to save Morty. The episode A Wrinkle in Time begins with time itself frozen. For 6 long months, Rick, Morty, and Summer have been living outside the flow of reality, waiting for things to stabilize. Rick acts casual, like it's another inconvenience, but the cracks show early. He warns them not to touch Beth or Jerry, or else their very existence could collapse. Right from the start, the weight of responsibility is on him. He knows what can go wrong, he knows the danger, and he knows that if something happens, it's on him to fix it. That pressure is always there for Rick, but this time it becomes unbearable. When Morty and Summer start bickering over who Rick loves more, it tears time apart. Literally. Their uncertainty splits reality into 2 versions of itself, each as possible as the other. The garage door opens, and suddenly Rick, Morty, and Summer are standing in a black void, the house floating in nothingness, Schrodinger's cats watching from the outside. For anyone else, it would be too much to take in. For Rick, it's another problem he has to solve. He's the only one who can. And yet, this role being the fixer, the genius, the one holding everything together isolates him completely. At first, Rick keeps his cool. He builds, he theorizes, he controls. But when the timelines multiply further and even he becomes uncertain, something darker slips out. He shouts at Morty and Summer, telling them exactly how little they matter to him. He mocks their need for love, cuts them down with words so sharp they leave scars. It's brutal, but it's also telling. Rick lashes out not because he truly feels nothing, but because deep down he feels too much. He can't handle their expectations, their desire to be loved by him, because he knows that one day he will fail them. Better to make them feel unwanted than to let them see how terrified he really is. This unraveling ends with the heart of the episode, the moment when Morty's collar breaks. Time is collapsing, and Morty begins to slip into the black void. Rick has only seconds to act. Without hesitation, he dives after him. He doesn't think. He doesn't calculate. He rips his own collar off, the only thing keeping him alive, and straps it onto Morty. For once, there's no sarcasm, no disguise. He is willing to die if it means Morty gets to live. And then comes the tragic silence. Rick floats alone in the endless dark. Morty has been saved, pulled back to safety with Summer. Rick, however, is doomed. He whispers to himself that this is it. There's no joke, no escape hatch. For a brief moment, the mask slips completely, and we see Rick as he really is, a man facing death alone. He tells Morty to be better than him, a final message filled with regret. Beneath all his arrogance, Rick knows what he is. He knows his flaws, his selfishness, his cruelty. His last words are not for himself, but for the boy he saved. Then, almost like fate, Rick notices something: Morty's collar, floating below him. In desperation, he scrambles for it. And here the tragedy deepens. He actually begs for it to work. He calls out to God, the very idea he has mocked and dismissed countless times before. "Please, God," he mutters, panicked, terrified, clutching at survival. In that second, Rick Sanchez, the smartest man in the universe, is reduced to the most basic plea of all: don't let me die alone. The collar works. He repairs it in time, snaps it onto himself, and is pulled back to safety. His first reaction? To curse God, to laugh, to pretend he never meant any of it. But we saw it. For a heartbeat, Rick Sanchez was honest. His bravado is nothing more than a mask for the crushing fear underneath. That's the tragedy of Rick in this episode. Not that he almost dies, but that he reveals how much he actually cares. He saved Morty without hesitation. He gave his life so Morty could live. And in the moment where he thought his end had come, his thoughts weren't of science, or winning, or being remembered. They were of Morty, and of his own failures as a man. Rick celebrates afterward, dancing with Summer, laughing, making it look like another close call. But we know the truth. That moment will stay with him, even if he buries it under alcohol and sarcasm. He let himself feel. He let himself love. And that terrifies him more than death itself. In the end, A Wrinkle in Time is about Rick's mask cracking for a moment, long enough to see the man underneath. A man who does love his grandson. A man who will sacrifice himself, even when he swears he wouldn't. A man who begs not to be alone, even though he hides it behind laughter. Rick faces death alone, and for the first time, we realize how much that hurts him. Still on the topic of death, in the next episode, Morty takes it to the next level. Morty buries his own corpse. The episode Rick Potion number 9 starts with something innocent. Morty wants Jessica. He doesn't want the universe, or power, or knowledge. He wants the chance to hold the hand of a girl he likes. That's it. But in Morty's world, even the smallest desire can spiral into horror. Morty goes to his dad first, looking for guidance. Jerry gives advice, clumsy but heartfelt, comparing Morty's crush to his love for Beth when they were teenagers. For a second, it's almost sweet. Jerry wants Morty to believe in romance, in the idea that love makes the struggle worthwhile. But Rick overhears and shreds that moment apart. He mocks Jerry, reminding Morty that Jerry's love story led to an unplanned pregnancy and a marriage hanging by a thread. Rick is cruel, he's surgical. He dismantles the illusion of love, reducing it to a chemical trick animals use to breed. For Jerry, it's humiliation. For Morty, it's despair. He's left caught between his father's naive hope and his grandfather's brutal cynicism. This tension pushes Morty to make a choice. Nervous and desperate, he asks Rick for help. And Rick, annoyed and dismissive, hands him a serum not out of kindness, but because Morty is a thorn in his ass. Only muttering after Morty leaves that it might go wrong if she has the flu. He shrugs it off, as if even the risk of catastrophe is worth taking seriously. At the dance, Morty tries the potion on Jessica. For a fleeting second, it works. She looks at him with warmth, with longing. Morty's heart races. But then Jessica sneezes. The serum latches onto the flu, mutates, and spreads like wildfire. In seconds, it infects Brad. Then the punch. Then the air. Then the entire school. Suddenly, every face turns toward Morty. Pupils wide, breathing heavy, each one wanting him with an obsession that feels less like love and more like hunger. Morty doesn't get what he wanted. He doesn't get love. He gets desire. Raw, twisted, violent. Jessica demands sex in front of everyone. Her friends join in. Teachers, students. The entire gym floods toward him like predators. Morty whimpers, "Oh crap." And it's the understatement of his life. He's chased, clawed at, nearly devoured by the very people he thought he wanted to notice him. Rick shows up, admits he screwed up, and offers a cure. But his cure is worse. Praying mantis DNA makes the infected not only crave Morty, but crave killing him afterward. And then it spreads beyond the school, across the entire world. Morty is a boy with a crush. Anymore, he's prey, hunted by billions. The horror escalates into absurdity. Jerry suspects Beth is cheating, storms through a world of mutants, fighting with shotgun and crowbar. Cities fall, people mutate, and Morty watches helplessly as the world crumbles because of a single selfish wish. The apocalypse doesn't come from space, or science experiments, or cosmic gods. It comes from Morty wanting Jessica to like him. Rick tries again. Another cure, this time a chaotic mix of DNA from animals and plants, sharks and koalas. It doesn't fix anything. It makes things worse. The entire Earth mutates into grotesque blobs Cronenbergs. The world is lost, permanently. On a rooftop, Rick jokes that at least no one wants to sleep with Morty anymore. But Morty doesn't laugh. He stares at the ruins of his planet, realizing millions are suffering because of him. He begs Rick to fix it. Rick shrugs, blames Morty, calls him creepy for asking for the serum in the first place. The cruelty cuts deep. Morty knows Rick is right in some way, but also knows Rick's arrogance turned a mistake into a global nightmare. Then comes the darkest twist. Rick doesn't fix the world. He abandons it. He takes Morty to another dimension where they both died minutes earlier. He steps into that world, replaces himself and Morty, and buries their corpses in the backyard. No repair, no healing. A swap. Morty digs his own grave. He lowers his own body into the dirt, his face pale, eyes hollow. Rick treats it like routine. But for Morty, it's soul-shattering. The family he goes back to is his. The home is his. His own body lies beneath the soil outside. Morty walks back inside with a 1,000-yard stare, shell-shocked, sitting quietly on the couch as if nothing happened. But everything has changed. He's seen the truth. His life is fragile, replaceable, and terrifyingly meaningless in Rick's universe. The real horror of the episode, not the mutants, not the lust, not the apocalypse, but Morty, realizing that nothing is safe, not even himself. He learns that his grandfather's brilliance doesn't save people, it abandons them. He learns that his own desires can spiral into tragedy. And worst of all, he learns that in the vast sea of infinite realities, his suffering doesn't matter. He can be replaced, buried, and forgotten. For Morty, this is an adventure gone wrong. It's trauma. It's the day he stopped being a kid. It's the day he buried his own body and walked back inside to pretend like life was normal. Just as Morty craves connection, Rick does too, and though he rarely expresses this, the next episode shows the length that he would go through to revive a friendship. If you want to join this channel on a growth journey, subscribe and turn on the notification to get more video uploads. Rick fails to save friendship. In the episode Rick-ternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, Rick is alone. The Smiths are gone on a family trip, and the house is silent. For a man like Rick, silence isn't peace, it's a reminder of emptiness. He heads to the garage, not to invent something new or chase some adventure, but to bring back the one thing he's lost and can't replace: Bird Person. Rick activates a best friend rejuvenation sequence. That phrase alone is telling. Rick doesn't use words like revive or repair. He calls it rejuvenation, like he's trying to restore not Bird Person's body, but the connection they once had. The machine pulls Bird Person's cybernetic, broken body out of the wall where Rick had hidden him, a chilling reminder of the fight that left Bird Person nearly dead. Rick strips away the wires, trying to reach the friend underneath. For a brief moment, Bird Person's eyes open. He sees Rick, and then he shuts down again. The AI in the garage explains the truth. Bird Person has buried his consciousness deep inside his own mind, refusing to face the world. That's when Rick does something rare. He doesn't shrug, he doesn't give up. He dives in. Literally. He plugs himself into Bird Person's brain, ready to chase after his friend no matter how far it takes him. Inside Bird Person's mind, Rick arrives naked, stripped bare, vulnerable. No gadgets, no armor. He lands in the memory of their first meeting at an alien music festival. For a second, it feels light. But as Rick follows the memories deeper, he realizes the cost. Bird Person has sealed himself behind layers of pain, war, betrayal, and love. Rick has to fight through it all to reach him. He sees their battles together, the chaos, the victories, the bond they forged side by side. He sees their resistance days, filled with people like Squanchy, who are now gone or broken. He even faces a memory of himself, Memory Rick. A version of his younger self who is still sharp, still cocky, and deeply suspicious. Together, they push forward. But this is a rescue mission. It's a tour through everything Bird Person has lost, and everything Rick failed to protect. Bird Person shows up, but not to thank Rick. He sees him, rejects him, and flies away. That's what makes this episode so crushing. Rick doesn't want to save Bird Person's body. He wants Bird Person to accept him again. He wants forgiveness, and Bird Person won't give it. As they travel deeper, Rick watches the roots of Bird Person's despair. Tammy, the betrayal, the love that turned into a weapon against him. Bird Person has locked himself inside his grief, building bombs within his mind, trying to destroy himself completely. Rick pleads with him. But Bird Person doesn't listen. Instead, he detonates the explosives, ready to let his own consciousness collapse forever. For Rick, this is about losing Bird Person. It's about losing the last true bond he ever had. Squanchy is gone. The Resistance is gone. The Smiths don't really know him. Bird Person is the only person who ever fought alongside him. The only one who saw Rick not as a genius, but as a friend. And here, in Bird Person's own mind, that friend would rather die than stand by him again. The journey continues, and Rick relives the Battle of Blood Ridge. Memory Rick revels in the victory, but Rick remembers the real wound. After the fight, he offered Bird Person a way out. He told him they could leave it all behind, go to any reality, escape the bloodshed. Bird Person refused. He said it wasn't worth his integrity. That moment haunts Rick, because it shows the divide between them. Bird Person stands for honor. Rick stands for survival. And survival to Rick has always meant running away. Finally, Rick reaches the hardest truth. Bird Person has a child, a daughter, and Rick knew about her all along but never told him. He only reveals it now, in desperation, as leverage to keep Bird Person alive. It works. Bird Person decides he'll live for the sake of his child, but it also destroys him. When they wake in the garage, Bird Person confronts Rick. He's furious, heartbroken, betrayed. He tells Rick that withholding this truth until it was necessary was unforgivable, and then he leaves. Rick doesn't stop him. He doesn't chase him. He stands there, watching the only friend he's ever cared about walk away. That's the tragedy. Rick fights through battles, memories, trauma, and grief, only to fail. He doesn't bring Bird Person back as his friend. He doesn't heal the bond. He saves Bird Person's life, but loses him anyway. And then, in the cruelest twist, Rick is left not with Bird Person, but with Memory Rick, the younger version of himself, still alive inside his brain. Memory Rick asks if he'll become the bitter, broken man standing in the garage. For a moment, Rick offers him the chance to be real, to grab a drink, to exist outside of memory. But Memory Rick hesitates, realizing that to do so means becoming the Rick who fails, who drives everyone away, who ends up alone in a garage begging the past to forgive him. Rick's silence in that moment says it all. He knows he's a dead end. He knows that anyone who sticks around him long enough will either die, betray him, or leave. He offers Memory Rick life, but Memory Rick doesn't take it, because deep down, he doesn't want to become who Rick is now. The final gut punch is subtle. Neighbor Gene arrives with batteries, answering the garage AI's plea for help. The garage panics, pretends not to know him, shuts him out. Rick doesn't rage. He doesn't curse. He mutters that he understands. Because he does. He understands why people leave him. He understands why Bird Person walked away. He understands why even a memory of himself wouldn't want to exist outside his head. Rick is left in the same silence he started with. The Smiths are gone. Bird Person is gone. Squanchy is gone. And all he has left is himself. And he can't even stand that. This episode is about saving Bird Person. It's about Rick being forced to confront the truth he spends every day trying to drink away. He is unfixable. He destroys every bond he touches. He hides it behind jokes, inventions, and chaos. But at the end of the day, he's a man who wants his best friend back and can't have him. Rick enters Bird Person's mind to save him. But really, it's Rick who needs saving. And no one's coming. Morty has always wanted to show he can survive in Rick's chaotic world, but this episode pushes him to the edge, testing just how far he's willing to go, even if it means taking a life. Morty's first kill. Morty always wanted to prove that he could handle Rick's world. The chance came in the episode Morty Night Run, when Rick let him drive the space cruiser. Morty was thrilled, his hands gripping the controls like it was the most important test of his life. For once, Rick was teaching him something that didn't involve blood, guts, or chaos. It felt normal. It felt like a step toward being treated as an equal. That small taste of freedom didn't last. Rick got a call, cold and businesslike, and suddenly the lesson was over. The way Rick spoke into the receiver made Morty uneasy, but when he questioned him, Rick brushed it off. That's when Jerry showed up in the backseat, clueless, intrusive, out of place as always. Rick didn't even bother taking him home. He dropped him at a daycare for Jerry's scattered across the multiverse, like he was leaving an unwanted bag at coat check. Morty had no idea that what came after would scar him forever. Rick's business turned out to be a weapons deal. A Gromflamite knocked on the ship's window and handed Rick a payment of 30 flirbos. Morty watched wide-eyed as Rick passed over a weapon powerful enough to level civilizations. The buyer introduced himself, Krombopulos Michael, an assassin. He was cheerful, polite, even friendly, the kind of person you wouldn't suspect was about to commit murder. Morty couldn't believe it. Rick was arming killers, all for money he planned to waste on arcade tokens. For Morty, that was the breaking point. He begged Rick to stop. He shouted that giving weapons to assassins was wrong, that innocent lives were on the line. Rick barely looked up. He was too busy thinking about the next round of Roy a Life Well Lived to care about the weight of what he'd done. That was when Morty made his choice. He would stop Crombo Michael himself. What followed wasn't courage, it was panic. In trying to interfere, Morty clumsily piloted the ship and accidentally killed the assassin. For a moment, he was frozen, staring at the body drifting in space. He hadn't meant to kill him, but the result was the same. Rick didn't show shock or grief, annoyance at the mess. For Morty, though, the accident was the first crack in his innocence. That's when Morty met Fart. The name was ridiculous, almost funny, but the being itself was strange and ethereal. A shimmering cloud of energy, speaking in a voice that felt soft yet commanding. Fart called Morty, friend. After the horror of what had happened, Morty clung to that word. Saving Fart felt like a chance to make things right, to undo the wrongness of killing Crombo Michael. Morty told himself this was the moral choice, the good thing. He would be a hero, but saving Fart wasn't simple. Government forces hunted them down. Chase after chase, shootout after shootout, the bodies began to pile up. Morty's hands, which had only ever held schoolbooks and video game controllers, were now gripping weapons and steering through bloodshed. Rick was furious, screaming that none of this would have happened if Morty had stayed out of it. Morty tried to block him out. He told himself those deaths weren't his fault. He was doing the right thing. He had to believe that. They finally reached the wormhole. Morty smiled through exhaustion, thinking the nightmare was almost over. He had saved his friend, proven that morality could exist in Rick's universe. But then came the truth. Fart didn't want to go home to live. Fart wanted to return with his kind and wipe out all carbon-based life. To him, every human, every alien, every living being made of flesh was a mistake in need of erasure. The friend, Morty, had risked everything to save was planning genocide. The words cut through Morty like ice. He had killed for Fart. He had run from soldiers, left innocent people dead in the crossfire, all for a cause that was never noble to begin with. Every drop of blood spilled was meaningless. Morty wasn't saving a friend, he was protecting a monster. In that moment, Rick didn't have to say anything. Morty knew what had to be done. With shaking hands, he lifted the antimatter gun. Fart looked at him without anger, almost with pity, and called him friend one last time. Morty pulled the trigger. The light flashed, and Fart was gone. Silence filled the ship. Morty's breath caught in his throat as the weight of it all sank in. He had killed before, by accident. But this time was different. This was a choice, a decision. A friend he had believed in was gone because of him. And the worst part was knowing it wasn't an act of bravery, it was desperation. Rick didn't comfort him. He didn't put a hand on his shoulder or tell him he had done the right thing. He pointed out, in his usual bitter way, that the entire mess was Morty's fault. That if Morty had let things be, nobody would have died. Not the civilians, not the soldiers, not Fart. Morty sat there quietly, hands trembling, too hollow to argue back. From that day on, Morty carried a shadow. The first time he pulled a trigger on purpose was against someone who had called him a friend. It was the moment he realized that in Rick's world, good intentions didn't matter. Trying to do the right thing didn't matter. You could still end up with blood on your hands, and once it was there, it never washed off. Morty didn't lose a friend that day. He lost the last piece of childhood innocence he had left. Rick never liked talking about his past. It wasn't until the Season 5 finale, Rick Mirai Jack, that the audience learned the whole truth. If you want to be a part of this channel future, like this video and subscribe for more videos like this. Rick's past revealed. Years ago, Rick was offered interdimensional travel by another Rick. When he refused, that Rick killed his original wife and daughter. That tragedy drove Rick across the multiverse, hunting their killer. Along the way, he made enemies of other Ricks. Some banded together against him, and eventually, they created the Citadel of Ricks. By the time Rick settled in C-137's world, he was old, broken, and lonely. He moved in with an abandoned Beth, hoping to rebuild some version of the family he had lost, though he remained his own worst enemy. At this point, Rick had thrown himself into a new obsession: Rick and Two Crows. In his mind, he was now an anime hero, fighting evil, humanoid owls. His crows acted as sidekicks, and together they battled through alien villages. After a recent victory, Morty tried to reconnect with him, but Rick awkwardly rejected him. Morty's attempts to get Rick back were constantly brushed aside, as Rick preferred the company of his fantasy adventures to family drama. Later, a much older Morty appeared at a bar. 40 years had supposedly passed, and he claimed Jerry had died of cancer while Summer had married a junkie. He begged Rick to come home, but Rick didn't care. That night, Rick discovered that his crows had sneaked out to meet Crowscare, his arch-nemesis. Without him, he realized he had been used again and returned home, only to discover that Morty's story about decades passing was a lie. Morty had used an aging serum from the Citadel to manipulate Rick. Visiting the Citadel to reverse Morty's aging, they found a deformed Morty, warning them about the Citadel's dangers, only to be shot by police. Soon after, they were invited to dinner with President Morty. Rick, ever suspicious, accepted, knowing something was off. At the dinner, President Morty subtly pushed Rick for information about the central finite curve, a barrier separating universes, where Ricks are the smartest beings from all others. Rick refused, but President Morty revealed that he had completed a brain scan of Rick's mind, giving him access to all of Rick's memories. Morty watched in horror as the president revealed how the Citadel had been exploiting Mortys. Beth's and Jerry's were manipulated into love to produce Mortys, and cloning was used to replace Mortys when they died. They were sent to serve Ricks across the multiverse, and any Morty who resisted was brainwashed. Morty lost faith in Rick for a moment, but freed them both from their chairs. President Morty allowed them to leave, though Rick remained suspicious. Testing his portal gun, Rick discovered that evil Morty had locked it to the Blender dimension. A Rick guard who tried to investigate was dismembered instantly. Rick realized the truth. President Morty was evil Morty, the only being to ever hack his portal gun. He fought off the guards, determined to escape. As the Citadel descended into chaos, Rick and Morty made their way to the lower levels, searching for portal fluid. All had been drained. Rick explained that evil Morty needed the brain scan to reverse engineer the Citadel's dimensional drive to escape the central finite curve. Morty demanded answers, and Rick revealed the full truth of his past, how Rick Prime had killed Diane and Beth, motivating him to build the portal gun and hunt Rick Prime across countless universes. Along the way, he killed countless Ricks, sank into depression, and became an alcoholic to survive the pain. The Citadel had been his refuge, a place to hide while still keeping hope of revenge alive. They eventually confronted evil Morty at the Citadel's dimensional drive. Evil Morty explained that Ricks justify everything they do through trauma. The central finite curve kept universes where Ricks were the smartest, separate from the rest. Evil Morty wanted to escape, to live free of Ricks. Morty realized that Rick had only returned because the crows had abandoned him, not out of loyalty. Evil Morty told them both they were evil for what they had done. The dimensional drive activated, flooding the Citadel with portal fluid. Many Ricks and Mortys trying to escape were rerouted to cloning vats and shredded, their remains powering the drive. Rick was trapped under debris. Evil Morty offered Morty a chance to join him, but Morty refused. Together, they evacuated the deformed Mortys into Mortyberg and detached it before a black hole formed from the portal fluid. Rick and Morty escaped into space with no portal fluid left. Evil Morty left the Citadel in an escape pod, traveling through the wormhole and breaking free of the central finite curve. He opened a golden portal and stepped into a universe where he would be free from Ricks. Throughout the ordeal, Rick's full history was laid bare. The Citadel's creation, the lives lost, the countless Ricks killed, all were consequences of his obsession, his need for revenge, and his inability to let go. Evil Morty's escape was a harsh reminder that even the smartest man in the universe cannot control everything. Rick and Morty ended up floating in space, exhausted but alive. They watched the Citadel crumble below them, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. Rick had survived by sheer cunning and intellect, but he also realized that his past, full of grief and obsession, had shaped everything he had done. Morty, seeing this, understood his grandfather as more than a reckless genius. He was a man haunted by loss, carrying the weight of his mistakes across the multiverse. The episode closed on Rick and Morty in quiet reflection, drifting among the stars, the ruins of the Citadel behind them, and the threat of evil Morty lingering somewhere beyond the curve. It was a stark reminder that even Rick, the smartest man in existence, could be vulnerable to manipulation, and that the consequences of his actions ripple across all realities. In the next episode, Morty navigates the chaos left behind by Rick, facing alien threats, tricky interdimensional adventures, and even a mysterious new ally named Nick, all while proving he can stand on his own. Meanwhile, Rick tests the limits of Morty's independences. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the wild emotional adventures of Rick and Morty. Forgetting Sarek Mortschel. In the episode Rickmancing the Stone after countless adventures, Morty spends his time traveling across dimensions, cleaning up the chaos Rick has left behind. Each planet, each timeline, presents a mess to fix. Alien cities trashed, civilizations accidentally wiped out, and minor disasters left in Rick's wake. Morty diligently works through his bucket list of responsibilities, quietly completing tasks that Rick never cared to check on. Finally, he returns to the garage, exhausted, only to notice something strange. Rick had marked a notch on the portal fluid container, an obvious warning to show whether Morty had used the portal gun. Panicking, Morty tries to cover his tracks. In a last-minute effort, he mixes the remaining portal fluid with a can of Mountain Dew, hoping the gun won't detect it. The portal gun seems to accept the mix, and relief washes over Morty until he accidentally spills the fluid on his palm. A tiny portal opens, spewing random junk across the garage, and from it emerges a man named Nick. Nick, seemingly unfazed, points at Morty's thigh and tells him he has a portal there, a stash hole of sorts. Rick soon realizes Morty has tampered with the portal gun and becomes furious. In his anger, he decides Morty isn't reliable anymore and could be replaced. He spins his wheel of names, eventually deciding on 2 crows to take Morty's place. Nick, who seems to know Rick well, warns Morty that their relationship has been abusive, encouraging Morty to accept this new arrangement. Meanwhile, Rick quickly trains the crows, showing them the tricks Morty should have learned over years of adventures. Refusing to accept his replacement, Morty tracks Nick down to a mental hospital. Nick, a bit sheepish, explains that he had met Rick at a bar and let his curiosity get the better of him. Rick had caught him poking at the portal gun and, in a dramatic punishment, shot him out of a catapult, leaving him with a breakdown. Despite this, Nick proves helpful. Using their portals, Morty and Nick fight off the hospital's abusive staff and dub themselves the Portal Boys, vowing to stick together. Meanwhile, Rick's crows attempt a mission to save a group of tortured aliens in exchange for a valuable artifact. Rick, frustrated by the distraction, abandons them on a planet inhabited by intelligent crow aliens. The aliens are offended by Rick's apparent betrayal and pull down his ship. Forced to confront the consequences of his actions, Rick learns to better connect with the crows, realizing he has been careless and overconfident. Back on Earth, Nick and Morty sneak into Rick's garage. Nick helps Morty vent his anger, allowing him to wreck the place. Morty takes an empty prototype portal gun, symbolically asserting his independence from Rick's control. When Rick returns with the crow aliens, he is shocked to see the garage in ruins. He notices the wheel used to select Morty's replacement and realizes that his crow training was, in fact, an elaborate trick played by Morty. Furious, the aliens turn all nearby crows feral, taking Rick's trained crows and forcing him to pursue them. Meanwhile, things escalate at Rick's portal fluid supplier. Nick becomes aggressive, pulling a gun and causing chaos. Morty is forced to incapacitate him when Nick shoots unarmed civilians, fleeing the scene in the process. On the crow ship, Rick is captured by the alien crows, but receives a call from Morty. Morty apologizes for lying and explains his actions. Rick admits that the crows were not a replacement for Morty. Understanding this, the crows allow themselves to be transformed by a large energy egg. Pretending to attack Rick, they secretly reattach their laser wires, destroy the egg, and revert to their normal selves. The tension escalates when Nick pursues Morty in his car. Morty is cornered on train tracks, and during a tense confrontation, Nick inadvertently admits that his story about Rick harming him was a lie. Realizing the situation, Morty acts quickly. He severs his own hand under the train wheel and drops it into Nick's thigh, creating a singularity that destroys Nick once and for all. With the threat gone, Rick flies down in the crow ship to Morty. Using his advanced technology, Rick regrows Morty's hand, symbolizing the restoration of their partnership, but he makes a difficult decision. Rick declares himself a bad partner, stating that Morty would be better off without him. Morty watches, tearful and shaken, as Rick begins cleaning the garage, meticulously restoring order while reflecting on his actions. Rick then waves goodbye to Morty and departs in his crow ship, beginning the Rick and Two Crows show. A drunken, chaotic adventure announced to no one in particular. Morty is left standing alone in the garage, watching the aftermath of the chaos unfold. Though safe for the moment, he feels the weight of everything that happened. Realizing that life with Rick is a dangerous, unpredictable journey, and that sometimes he may have to walk it alone. Wubba lubba dub dub. It's Rick Sanchez's iconic catchphrase, the one you hear in countless episodes. The catchphrase sounds like a joke, loud and chaotic. Yet behind it rests a hidden weight that only careful viewers notice. The hidden pain behind Rick's catchphrase. The catchphrase, first introduced in Season 1, is a window into the emotional core of Rick, a man whose pain he buries under layers of sarcasm, alcohol, and interdimensional escapades. In the very first season, Me Seeks and Destroy gave us a glimpse of the phrase's origins. Rick invents it in a moment of jest while demonstrating the Me Seeks box. a gadget designed to summon helpers who exist only to complete a task and then vanish. Rick, laughing, shouts, "Wubba lubba dub dub," in a playful nod to Arsenio Hall, whose own energetic catchphrase influenced Rick's style. On the surface, it's a joke, a way to lighten the mood in the chaos of the Meeseeks' escalating disasters. Yet, even here, the seeds of something deeper are planted. Later, Bird Person, one of Rick's oldest and most trusted friends, provides a shocking translation. In Bird Person's native language, "Wubba lubba dub dub" actually means, "I am in great pain. Please help me." Suddenly, a line that had always sounded like a carefree, self-assured mantra reveals itself to be a masked cry for help. The humor, the bravado, the loud, reckless energy all are a veneer. Underneath it lies a man desperately struggling with grief, guilt, and the weight of being the smartest and often loneliest man in the universe. This duality is reflected in how Rick uses and abandons the catchphrase over time. In Raising Gazorpazorp, the catchphrase makes a return, this time more pronounced as a recurring joke. Rick deploys it as if to remind the world and maybe himself that he's untouchable, above consequence. Yet, viewers can sense the subtle undercurrent of sorrow. Each shout carries energy and a hint of the existential exhaustion Rick has long felt. By the time we reach Ricksy Business, Rick's use of the phrase is layered. Morty hears it, laughs, and dismisses it as another of Rick's ironic antics. Bird Person, however, takes Morty aside and translates it once more. He's saying, "I am in great pain. Please help me." Morty, unsurprisingly, scoffs. "I got news for you," he says. He's saying it ironically. But the irony is exactly the point. Rick doesn't allow himself to be vulnerable, and irony becomes his shield. In fact, by the end of the episode, Rick replaces the catchphrase with a defiant, "I don't give a ferg, you zuck." It's louder, more aggressive, more alienating. A deliberate replacement for the phrase that once admitted his pain. Season 2 offers another layer to this evolving emotional story. In Total Recall, there's a flashback of Rick using the phrase, reminding viewers of its continuity and importance in his identity. Later in Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, Tiny Rick uses a playful variation, "Wubby lubby doob doob." The slight change in wording mirrors the subtle shifts in Rick's emotional state over time. It's no longer about fun. It's about maintaining connection, identity, and control, even in alternate forms of himself. Rick's catchphrase becomes a subtle Easter egg in other episodes too. In Amorteiken Grick Fitty, for instance, the phrase appears as a background gag on the Phantasma Billards Bar beer menu, cleverly written as, "I am in grape pain." This pun reinforces the recurring theme, that Rick's humor is inseparable from his suffering. Even when it's a joke that whispers, "I hurt, but don't ask me about it." Fast forward to the more recent seasons, and the phrase reappears in moments that expose the cracks in Rick's facade. In Rick Murray Jack, Rick returns to the Smith residence after being abandoned by his crows, only to discover that Morty tricked him into believing he'd been gone for 26 years. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, Rick utters the catchphrase again, a reminder that his pain, his loneliness, and his existential dread are constants even when the multiverse itself seems to conspire against him. In Night Family, the humor of the catchphrase is turned on its head. Morty points out that fans of their podcast want Rick to say it at the end, but Rick refuses. The refusal is telling. He no longer wants to broadcast his pain, even in jest. The layers of irony, the deflection, and the underlying emotional weight are all part of Rick's armor. The catchphrase has become both a symbol of his identity and a signal of his vulnerability, one he is no longer willing to expose publicly. And yet, in Summer of All Fears, the catchphrase resurfaces at a critical moment. Rick uses it before generating the massive energy needed to escape the Matrix dimension, building mechanical pods and trapping its inhabitants. The line is comedic relief here. It's a ritual, a release, a way for Rick to channel both his power and his pain into action. Every time he says it, there's a tension between what the words seem to mean and the emotional truth beneath them. It's an invocation of strength, but also a plea, however subtle, for help in a universe that rarely offers it. The emotional depth of Wubba Lubba Dub Dub becomes even more poignant when considering Rick's broader arc. Throughout the series, Rick is portrayed as a genius, a manipulator, a man who can traverse the multiverse with ease. But behind that brilliance lies profound sadness. He's lost family, faced betrayals, and repeatedly sacrificed his own well-being to chase knowledge, vengeance, or fleeting moments of connection. The catchphrase, seemingly playful, is a constant reminder of the inner turmoil he carries with him, one that no portal gun, no interdimensional adventure, and no amount of alcohol can erase. Interestingly, Rick's emotional journey with the catchphrase mirrors his relationships with others. When he invented it, it was a private joke, a playful nod. As the series progresses, it becomes a shared language, a code between Rick and characters like Bird Person or Morty. Yet, the true meaning, the pain remains hidden from most. Bird Person is one of the few who understands the depth, seeing past the layers of sarcasm and deflection. This duality perfectly encapsulates Rick himself, always performing, always masking, rarely revealing the true self beneath the chaos. Even when Rick stops using the phrase publicly, it never truly disappears. In subtle ways, through tiny Rick, background gags, or his own occasional lapses, it remains a part of him. It's a hidden thread connecting his moments of triumph and tragedy, humor and despair, genius and isolation. Each use, each variation, is a snapshot of his emotional state, a barometer of how much of Rick we are seeing versus how much he is hiding. The catchphrase also highlights the central tension in Rick's life, his struggle to connect. In the multiverse, he can manipulate reality, outsmart enemies, and achieve the impossible. But he cannot fix his emotional wounds or repair his fractured relationships. The catchphrase is an acknowledgement of that tension, a whisper of vulnerability hidden beneath a mask of invincibility. Even in his most chaotic moments, whether escaping interdimensional battles or inventing wild gadgets, that simple line reminds us that Rick Sanchez is more than a reckless genius. He's a deeply, profoundly hurt man, and that is what makes it resonate so powerfully with fans. On the surface, it's a silly, memorable phrase, perfect for a laugh or a clip montage. But for those who look closer, it's a profound expression of pain, isolation, and the struggle to survive emotionally in a universe that rarely offers mercy. Every time Rick says, "Wubba lubba dub dub," we hear a catchphrase and a quiet plea, a signal that beneath the chaos and humor, he is still suffering, still searching for connection, and still asking, in his own cryptic way, for someone to notice. In conclusion, "Wubba lubba dub dub" is more than a funny line. It is Rick's emotional fingerprint, a linguistic echo of the loneliness, sorrow, and suppressed trauma that define him. From its first appearance in Me Seeks and Destroy, to its nuanced iterations in episodes like Ricksy Business, Rick Mirai Jack, and Summer of All Fears, it threads together Rick's comedy, his genius, and his tragedy. And while fans may laugh along with it, the catchphrase carries a secret weight. It is, at its heart, Rick Sanchez admitting, however indirectly, that he is in great pain, and he has been asking for help all along. So the next time you hear Rick yell it before launching into another wild, reckless adventure, remember, it's a joke. It's a cry that somehow survives the multiverse, echoing across dimensions. A reminder that even the smartest, most fearless man in existence can still be broken, lonely, and in need of someone to understand. Wubba lubba dub dub is Rick's catchphrase. It's Rick's truth. Rick Sanchez has always been a man shrouded in mystery. He avoids talking about his past, brushes off questions, and even lies when pressed. For years, fans pieced together bits and fragments about him, some wild, some heartbreaking, but it wasn't until the Season 5 finale that the full story came into focus. When Rick's trauma breaks the multiverse, the death of Diane and Beth left a scar that would follow Rick across the multiverse, shaping every reckless adventure, every drunken outburst, and every attempt at connection with the family he now has. After decades of chasing the Rick responsible for his family's murder, Rick became a fugitive of the multiverse. He made enemies of countless other Ricks, who eventually banded together against him, but then some allied with him, forming the Citadel of Ricks, a hub where he could try to manage the chaos of his own life. In the end, an old, worn-down Rick sought out a version of his daughter abandoned by her own Rick, hoping to create some semblance of the family he'd lost. But as fans have long suspected, Rick is his own worst enemy. The episode begins with Rick fully immersed in his latest bizarre obsession, Rick and Two Crows. Rick has become a full-on anime protagonist, battling anthropomorphic owls with crow-themed gadgets, while a flock of loyal, if mischievous, crows act as his sidekicks. He's living out his cartoonish fantasy, and for a moment, he seems happy, even invincible. After defeating a group of owls at a remote village, Morty approaches, desperate to reconnect, begging Rick to come home. Rick brushes him off, awkward and distracted, more invested in his crows and their fantastical adventures than in the family he has left behind. Later, a much older Morty, a 40-year-old version, confronts Rick at a bar. He claims decades have passed, that Jerry died of stage 4 cancer, and that Summer married a junkie. Morty pleads with Rick to return with him, to come home and fix what's been broken, but Rick rebuffs him again, coldly and without explanation. For Rick, even time and age can't make the emotional work of reconnecting worth the effort. The night takes an unexpected twist when Rick's crows sneak out to meet Rick's old nemesis, Crow Scare, planning their own adventures without him. Rick notices their betrayal, realizing the crows were using him as a rebound, as he has used countless others over the years. He returns home, only to discover that Morty's claims of decades passing were false. Morty had taken aging serum from the Citadel of Rick's to manipulate him emotionally. The realization hits. Rick, no one, not even Morty, is fully honest, and yet the consequences are real. They visit the Citadel, re-aging Morty to his original self. There, they encounter a deformed Morty rambling about the Citadel being an inescapable weapon of mass destruction before he is shot by the police. The event foreshadows the darker truths about the Citadel. It's a machine built on exploitation, manipulation, and cruelty. Shortly after, Rick and Morty are invited to dinner by President Morty, who has pardoned Rick for his past crimes. Rick is naturally suspicious but agrees to attend. At dinner, President Morty, the same figure who once orchestrated chaos across the Citadel, hints at his interest in the central finite curve and the knowledge Rick possesses. When Rick refuses to cooperate, President Morty restrains them both, revealing a completed brain scan that evil Rick had once begun. Morty apologizes for bringing Rick into this trap, but it's too late. The scan exposes a horrifying truth. The Citadel has been producing Mortys at an industrial scale. Mortys are in such demand that the Citadel forcibly manipulates Beths and Jerrys to produce them and resorts to cloning when necessary. When a Morty dies, the new Morty is brainwashed with the old one's memories, ensuring a never-ending supply of compliant sidekicks across the multiverse. Morty is horrified, losing faith in Rick and the systems they inhabit. He frees them both from their bindings, and President Morty allows their departure, but Rick remains vigilant. Realizing that Morty had refilled his portal gun's fluid, Rick tests the gun, shoving a Rick guard through a portal, only to witness the guard's horrific dismemberment in the Blender dimension. It becomes clear. President Morty is, in fact, Evil Morty, the one entity who successfully hacked Rick's portal gun. Rick fights off the guards and escapes with Morty as chaos erupts throughout the Citadel. Evil Morty broadcasts the chilling command: "Nobody leave, everybody stay." The Citadel descends into madness as Ricks and Mortys, naturally seeking escape, are killed by portals leading to hostile dimensions. The Citadel itself becomes a dangerous trap, a nightmarish testament to the cruelty and ingenuity of both Ricks and Mortys when unchecked. Rick and Morty descend to the bottom of the Citadel, hoping to locate untainted portal fluid, but all has been drained. Here, Rick explains the strategic importance of his brain scan to Evil Morty. It provided schematics for the Citadel's dimensional drive, allowing Evil Morty to penetrate the central finite curve. Morty, frustrated, refuses to continue without understanding, and Rick cedes, giving Morty a brain-scanning device. Through it, Morty witnesses Rick's tragic backstory, how the murder of Diane and Beth drove Rick to complete the portal gun, explore the multiverse, and dedicate his life to hunting Rick Prime. Despite decades of effort, Rick never finds Prime, leading to the deaths of countless Ricks and spiraling him into depression and alcoholism. The Citadel itself was a refuge, a place to escape from himself and other Ricks, but paradoxically, it became a prison. C-137. Rick's arrival at the Prime Dimension is explained. He wasn't fleeing. He was waiting for closure, waiting for Prime to come home. It's a lonely, tragic arc that casts Rick's brilliance in a darker light. The genius we admire is inseparable from his pain. The confrontation with Evil Morty brings the philosophical heart of the episode into focus. Evil Morty argues that all Ricks exploit their trauma to justify their actions. The central finite curve, an artificial barrier, separating universes where Rick is the smartest from the rest of existence, symbolizes the selfish preservation of Rick-centered realities. Evil Morty wants to escape the curve, to live a life free from the gravitational pull of Rick's intellect and influence. Morty is disappointed to learn Rick's motivations were petty. He returned only because the crows had dumped him. Evil Morty points out that both he and C-137 Rick are now evil, forged by trauma, choices, and circumstance. As Evil Morty activates the Citadel's dimensional drive, chaos escalates. Portal fluid floods the Citadel, while Ricks and Mortys attempting Operation Phoenix are rerouted into cloning vats and meat grinders, their remains fueling the drive. Morty watches in horror, realizing the true stakes of interdimensional manipulation. Trapped under debris as the Citadel begins to collapse, Rick is almost defeated, and Evil Morty offers Morty a chance to join him. Morty refuses, choosing loyalty to his grandfather over the freedom Evil Morty promises. Together, they evacuate deformed Mortys to Mortyburg, detach it from the Citadel, and narrowly escape a black hole formed by the runaway portal fluid. However, They are left stranded in space without portal fluid, a sobering reminder of how even their cleverness has limits. Meanwhile, evil Morty escapes the Citadel in a pod, traveling through the wormhole and finally penetrating the central finite curve. Emerging in the greater multiverse, he breathes a sigh of relief. The barrier has been destroyed, a new era of possibility opening before him. With an upgraded portal gun, he steps through a gold portal, leaving behind the chaos he orchestrated and the trapped, broken remnants of the Citadel. This episode is a masterclass in layered storytelling. On the surface, it's interdimensional chaos, wild fights, and mind-bending science fiction. But beneath that, it's a story about trauma, consequence, and the emotional weight of Rick's past. The Citadel is a hub for Ricks and Mortys, and a monument to the ways Rick's grief, obsession, and genius intersect. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unprocessed trauma and the ways even the smartest individuals can be trapped by their own history. Rick's refusal to open up about his past is survival. Yet when the truth is revealed, it reframes everything. Every reckless adventure, every act of brilliance, and every moment of detachment from his family. Rick's life, full of humor and chaos, is underscored by profound loss. Evil Morty's rise is the mirror to Rick's failures, a demonstration of how trauma can create someone even more cunning, more resolute, and, in some ways, more dangerous. By the end of the episode, we see Rick in a rare moment of vulnerability, not in words, but in actions. Stranded in space with Morty, with no portal fluid and no escape, Rick is confronted with the consequences of decades of grief, obsession, and interdimensional meddling. Morty's choice to stay with him reinforces a theme that runs through the series. Even in a universe filled with infinite possibilities, connection, loyalty, and family can still anchor us. This episode is a turning point. It humanizes Rick while simultaneously expanding the scope of the universe. It reminds viewers that behind the catchphrases, wild adventures, and reckless antics, Rick Sanchez is a man shaped by grief, obsession, and loss. A man whose past cannot be ignored, no matter how fast he runs, how far he travels, or how many dimensions he conquers. In the end, the story of Rick, the Citadel, and evil Morty is about consequences, the limits of genius, and the weight of memory. It's a reminder that no matter how clever or powerful one may be, the ghosts of the past and the pain of loss cannot be outrun. If you enjoy deep dives into your favorite characters, episodes, and adventure, be sure to subscribe to get more videos like this.